Being rather young. Think of it this way. Godzilla 2014 is a lot of Gen Z's first Godzilla experience. They went on to see Kong Skull Island, King of the Monsters 2019, and Godzilla vs. Kong. They grew up on these movies. A kid that was 10 years old when they saw 2014 is going to be 20 years old now. Many of these people are going to have strong fondness of these movies because of the experience of seeing the kaiju on the big screen. And when you're younger, it can be pretty tough to hear harsh criticism for something you love and you aren't armed with the proper debate tactics and vocabulary to counter these criticisms. But here is a hard pill you are going to have to swallow. That is all subjective. When I have criticisms of these movies, they are objective flaws in the writing, such as inconsistencies and contrivances. It is an objective oversight that Emma Russell would lose her son to the destruction of Titan combat, only to decide that this horrible fate is necessary for billions of people because of climate change. It is inconsistent with what we know about the character.
Alastor Hacon attempts to make himself as like this objective guy that anyone can rely on here. What he's basically telling you is that his video of the Godzilla films is 100% factual. It is true, and anyone who disagrees is just having a subjective disagreement about it, while his criticisms were objective and that the film had quote unquote objective writing flaws or whatever. See, he doesn't ever elaborate on what this is, but in the previous video, he has some strange complaints like, I didn't edit this, guys, actually. I didn't edit this. Why are they blue balling Godzilla? And Sarazawa's. He's not talking about why you can't bomb Godzilla. What? And other silly stuff like that. And you get the point. It's all covered in the previous video, but it's goofy. And Alistair Hackon doesn't particularly prove himself to be an objective measurement guy solely because of this one thing he does immediately right after. He's like, why doesn't Emma Russell want to like kill all the monsters, instead wants to use them for environmental purposes? And you want to know why? It's because Emma Russell has explicitly been shown and stated to have worked at Monarch for a majority of her life, and so she still sees the monsters as a source of beauty and power and other interesting adjectives that you could use for this, which she then uses to justify her very vague environmentalist plans to, destroy the world or whatever. And so Alistair Hackon immediately proves himself to straight up be forgetting plot points at will or intentionally obfuscating them for the sole purpose of acting like these are hard hitting criticisms. I recommend not lying to your audience or lying to anyone who's watching the video, Alistair, because people are gonna have to remember things, and not everyone has perfect memory like I do. I'm kidding about that, but you get the point. It's it's stupid. I don't recommend lying to your audience, but you can if you want. But don't call yourself objective, man. You're not, because I was easily able to fact check that. So maybe you're not an objective measurement. Maybe your criticisms aren't objective.
I want to talk about the thing that surprised me the most with Skull Island. Its theme and commentary. It's a thoroughly expressed theme, and the commentary is well thought out and consistent throughout the runtime. The commentary is that humanity shouldn't insert ourselves into nature when we don't understand the natural order. Oftentimes, humanity tries to control nature and twist it to our will purely out of ego. Look at the interest in weather controlling technology. Little do we know that the order is the way that it is for a reason. The skull crawlers are an invasive species that will wipe out all life on the island, including a tribe of humans. If it wasn't for Kong keeping them in check, they would overrun the island. When Packard tries to kill Kong, he inadvertently awakens the alpha skull crawler, something that probably wouldn't have happened if he simply left the island instead of trying to kill Kong. In a single shot of Skull Island, the film nails its theme with no words.
So I want to give some spotlight to this theme that he purports. He says Skull Island is about environmentalism or whatever, when it's not really the case. It resembles more of a Vietnam War standpoint, and the Skullcrawlers are like the reptilian war machine and stuff like that, and they can't feel, they're emotionless, and they're supposed to like contrast Godzilla, who is exactly the same as these characters, while Kong is emotional, setting up the future conflict for Godzilla versus Kong. Of course, Adam Wingard does botch this, but the point still stands that, it's whatever, right? Like this whole environmentalism narrative can probably work, but it doesn't seem very conducive to any other readings. Skull Island is more than just environmentalism. So the parallels to Vietnam War stuff, he just deliberately ignores for some reason.
Bernie is telling people on his podcast with his unaltered voice that he's about to download some company secrets. Why would you do that? You're allowing Apex to prepare for a security breach.
I'm sorry for the jarring jump that you probably witnessed. Like, oh my God, he was talking about Skull Island. Now he's talking about Godzilla versus Kong. What's happening? I cut all that stuff out. I don't care. We're trying to get through this video. But what I'm just gonna say here is that he could have criticized anything about the Bernie thing. Instead, he starts criticizing Bernie using an unaltered voice on his podcast that Apex has never seen or cared about in their lives. So interesting.
Especially since someone like him would 100% be in Apex's sights. How did Monarch manage to enter the perpetual storm surrounding Skull Island, which at this point has completely engulfed the island, set up camp, capture King Kong without completely getting wiped out at any step? Why is Gia coming along for the talk with Dr. Lind in the dome on Skull Island? In terms of character writing, I understand why she is here. She needs to express disappointment that they are leaving Skull Island. But from an internal logic standpoint, what reason does she have to be here with these two adults who she can't even hear? The Monsterverse has this awful habit of simply stating that Monarch has captured Titans without explaining how they did it. Two characters talk about using Kong to help them get to the Hollow Earth, but they then cut to a sleeping Kong on a boat without explaining how they managed to accomplish this. Kong isn't a normal-sized gorilla. He's the size of a skyscraper. There are logistics that need to be explained as to how this was accomplished, because as far as we've seen, Monarch has never been seen in the process of capturing a Titan, only shown to have already done it without any explanation.
So this whole section that he's doing is basically rapid fire criticisms that are designed to like make seem the movie could buckle under its weight if we criticize it long enough. So obviously, of course, you will see silly things such as we need an explanation for why King Kong was trapped or captured by Monarch. The answer is very simple. They don't have to show you. It happened. Use your implicit storytelling. You see the chains, you see the boat, you see him asleep. Simple. He got sedated, not and got put in chains, and now is getting sent across the ocean to go find a new home. That's literally it. That's what they're doing. And so that's like the big issue with this section, right? Where he does these rapid fire complaints and they're not doing much, but you can just easily use implicit storytelling to move the thing along. Godzilla vs. Kong isn't particularly good either, but you need to understand that this guy is literally just like making stuff up to complain about.
So Dr. Lind really didn't think about the possibility of Kong not cooperating on the expedition to the Hollow Earth?
Meow. Whatever.
Alexander Skarsgård's character is an idealist, while Rebecca Hall's character is a pessimist in this situation. One sees it as dumb, the other sees it as possible. Of course, he's not going to really particularly think of Kong not cooperating, but when Godzilla enters the arena, pretty much, Kong will fight for his life, and they have to actually like help Kong. So
What the fuck kind of question is this? Only someone who wasn't paying attention to King of the Monsters or fell for the bullshit in that movie would ask this question.
It's a news headline, buddy. Don't get your pants in a twist.
Why does Maddie assume she's allowed to drive this van that doesn't belong to either of them? And we're adding more characters with the fat British kid? Stop. The coincidence of the first shop owner Maddie and her fat British friend go to being the correct one that doxed Bernie's address for $10 and a live fish is absolutely fucking insane.
To answer all this, the introduction of the British kid is for, the Team Godzilla side. So there's two different sides or whatever. It's whatever. And, it's just a movie. A movie doesn't have to show you every little bit in detail of it. So, of like, them going to the place that found out that they doxed Bernie's address or whatever. It's whatever. It's a movie. I mean, it's not a particularly good one, but it's a movie nonetheless. It doesn't have to show you every little bit in detail or explain to you everything. So, yeah, this is nitpicky stuff. Very nitpicky.
Bernie's wife has nothing to do with his campaign against Apex. Why even mention her? That was such a layup and they failed to score somehow. You could have easily made it so that Apex had something to do with Bernie's wife's death. What the fuck?
The British kid, Josh Valentine, looks down at Bernie's quote unquote holster and thinks it's a gun. And then instead, Bernie takes out the flask because it was given to him by his late wife. The point here is to, set up for a plot point later that this thing is used, which is poured on Mechagodzilla and, stops Mechagodzilla for a short moment. Yamato no Orochi stuff, but you get the point. Moving on.
They keep talking about Kong like he's an unstoppable beast, but every time we see him, he's just chained up like he's a regular monkey.
They do not treat Kong like an unstoppable threat throughout this movie. Like, what? You should be like applying that to Godzilla or Mechagodzilla, but nah, it's Kong that they treat as an unstoppable threat, guys. Yeah.
Godzilla gets staggered by a regular fighter jet. What even is power scaling at this point?
Ironically, this is a very consistent moment with Godzilla in the Monsterverse, where Godzilla has been staggered by the military, albeit slightly. Godzilla doesn't actually get hurt by these missiles or whatnot, but he roars and the pain sound effect comes in, like signifying that like it irritates him and he, hits back hard. This happens in the Pensacola scene, this happens in the bridge scene, the obvious stuff. And so, but the other interesting thing is that he mentions power scaling. This is not particularly power scaling whatsoever. This is actually just how do I say it? Consistency. It's very consistent. So I don't know why he's using the hobby term as like a shorthand for consistency, but I'd rather him use consistency than other things. So, moving on.
Advancement of technology in this universe is comical. What happened to the grounded take on kaiju movies that we started this franchise with? This has decided to become Diet Pacific Rim with the Elon Musk hypertunnel in the Neon City. What happened to this franchise? The insane quantum leap this universe took between movies is never explained.
This is just really funny. He's treating this like it's the fall of Rome, the burning of Alexandria, 9/11, all these catastrophic events. He is treating it like this. You can kind of tell. Like he's literally going, what happened to this beautiful grounded take on the Monsterverse? Why did they go? Why are they starting to go pulp? Why are they going B movie? What the hell is happening? Stupid stuff like that. Even though the Monsterverse has always been very campy, this is just like the more overt stuff that they're doing now.
So there's a sun inside the Earth? What is happening? I don't think you understand how severe this is. The implications of a sun inside the Earth are too numerous to list right now.
Alright, so this is all out of hyper nitpicking, like complaining about why is there a sun in a hollow earth? What the heck? Even though it's literally an inverted earth because of, space-time stuff. But, we're done here with this. We're gonna skip the nitpicking stuff and we're gonna move ahead. I don't think anybody, including me, really wants to keep going through this nitpicking section. So, jumping ahead. Here we go.
What happened? There are so many questions about this world. Like an axe with a Godzilla spine is just embedded in the skull of a Godzilla-esque skeleton? What are the implications of this? Were there more Godzillas before this one? Is Godzilla the last of his kind? Who even made this thing? Of course it's never explained. Explaining it would break the world building.
Godzilla in movies has always been the last of his kind. They have never settled for more than one Godzilla. This has always been the case in most Godzilla films, and usually when Godzilla has a son, he's a surrogate son who Godzilla adopts, and he's not like born at all from him. So, what I'm literally saying to you is that Godzilla in 2014 has been alone since the start. They make it very obvious and clear, and the fact that he couldn't like see this from the start is wild. Like they straight up go in 2014, as far as I'm concerned, oh, Godzilla's the last of his kind, guys. And like, yeah, they take it very much at face value. There's one of these dudes and there's multiple of the Mutos. Why is there two Godzillas? Well, they're all dead except this Godzilla. So why is he asking these questions? Well, it's because he didn't get it, and now he's saying, oh, if they try to explain these things, it would break the lore, guys, even though it is very obvious. And how every movie they kind of just emphasize that Godzilla is a lonely little man.
Where was this Godzilla in the past two films? Godzilla absolutely destroyed Kong while he struggled with the antagonists of his previous two films. This is especially egregious with the male Muto, which was a whole 100 feet shorter than Kong, 75,000 tons lighter than Kong, had less experience in combat than Kong because he was literally born days before the fight, and presumably Kong is smarter than the Muto because he is capable of communication and strategy as established in GVK.
The interpretation of the cinematic universe, specifically based in Godzilla's speed and strength, is important to understand. Basically, because this interpretation summarizes this, where Godzilla in the first movie is slow, but in Godzilla versus Kong, he's faster, stronger, and isn't lazier, pretty much, or slower. But in Godzilla 2014, if we're looking at on it's a standalone thing in a natural sense, the whole point is that it's a thematic thing. Basically, the Mutos are the anti-Godzilla, the thing that has a family while Godzilla does not, and thus they're quote unquote stronger together, and Godzilla is alone and he can't really win on his own. That's why Ford Brody steps in and helps him, at least implicitly helps him, and Godzilla sees him and understands him. But Godzilla inherently was never going to beat the male Muto until the latter half of the film, because the male Muto has always been a thorn in his side throughout the movie. Godzilla is slower, Godzilla can't reach the thing, and Godzilla's atomic breath is, at least in the novelization as they state, is being sapped, but it's mostly stemming through like suspense and stuff like that. The movie deliberately does not want Godzilla to immediately beat the male Muto. It would not be a challenge. It would not be an interesting conflict where Godzilla fights against two deadly enemies who basically seek to kill him and destroy the planet. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I'm just confused on why this is the case here, what he's trying to posit, because he's like, oh well, why didn't he just do this to the male Muto? And it's like, okay, buddy. Okay.
Now, I've seen a lot of discussion on power scaling in the Monsterverse, but we need to take a moment to talk about why power scaling is important. For that, I've invited Mildra onto this video to tell us why it's so important.
Who is Mildra? What's happening? What the hell is happening?
Power scaling. The source of many a great nerd fight on both the physical and virtual front. A measuring system that's utterly useless. Until it isn't. Or is that vice versa? Anyway, what power scaling is seems to vary from person to person, as it's more of an idea than anything else. For the purposes of this, let's say that it's a measuring metric between characters. I think a lot of anime fans will conjure up things like the power levels in early DBZ, or the grading system that's used by stands in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But power scaling can extend beyond that. In reality, it's another arm of making things consistent, both an overall strength between characters, the escalation in a given narrative, as well as making sure that the fiction is internally consistent with its own rules. To that end, let me invoke two examples of doing it wrong, neither of which use power scaling in the sense that people would argue about, but are nevertheless within the same umbrella and contain the same problem, sort of. So Exhibit A, The Long Night in the Game of Thrones TV series, because I am convinced the books will be completed posthumously at this rate. The Night King and the horde of White Walkers was built up as this massive looming threat for several episodes in the final seasons. Then the inevitable battle comes, and all of that build-up amounts to a fight that's too dark to see much of anything, and the Night King is written off like an afterthought. All in the span of one episode after all of that build-up. Is it shocking? Maybe. But was it worth undermining all that build-up and doing a Gynax ending? Absolutely not. Of course, that's the least of the problems when it came to the tail end of that series, but that has been covered extensively by other people and beyond the scope of this. Moving on to Exhibit B, let's consider Zod and his followers in Man of Steel, a film that has been my whipping boy for many years and another notch on the list of reasons why I never want to hear the word deconstruction said ironically by a director or writer ever again. Throughout the film, it's made clear that the effects of yellow sunlight on Kryptonians can be overwhelming in terms of how much they enhance senses that they're not used to dealing with, along with everything else, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And it's mentioned several times that the suits are a way to filter that for a more manageable amount. At least that'd make sense. And then in the third act, Zod is just able to shed his armor and the suit filtering without suffering any ill effects like his followers did, only given a single line about training his entire life to master his senses, which creates more questions than answers.
Honestly, I genuinely think, like, whoever this guy is, if Man of Steel has been his whipping boy for years, evidently he probably didn't pay attention to the movie for years. There is a scene where Zod's armor functions literally shut off, and he gets, the full unfiltered powers of the sun and genuinely starts tweaking out, but his senses overcome it. That's literally the whole point. So you're supposed to be like, wow, how does Zod overcome this despite his followers being potential victims of the sun's power or whatever? It's because in the line of dialogue that that he mastered his senses, that the senses on that they would have for his followers would overload and kill them, but Zod was that strong. He's very adaptable as a person, very adaptable, very flexible, right? Meanwhile, Superman has been raised on Earth this whole time, so it's normal for him. You get the point. So I don't know what this guy's on about, but as this video progresses, it starts like stopping about what this video is about. But let's keep going.
Again, a shocking move that heightens drama, at the expense of not thinking through the consequences or implications. But what does this have to do with power scaling, you may ask? Well, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Chekhov's gun, the dynamic between setup and payoff. However, I feel the term doesn't answer alone one thing that's equally important: degree. If you give a lot of build-up to something, or make something very important, the payoff has to be equal in scope. At least equal in a way to make the journey not invalidated by a bad destination. Yes, I know a lot of those demotivationals say it's not the destination, it's the journey. That's a load of crap. If you put Hitchcock's bomb under the table and focus on it, it better not be the equivalent of a sparkler firework that you get on a kid's allowance.
He's speaking very authoritatively on how Chekhov's gun should work, but the payoff doesn't have to be big. The payoff could be small, the payoff could be medium, it could be big, it could be changing the ramifications of the whole story. It could really do that. Or someone could do a Gynax ending. I really love Gynax endings. Those are cool, I personally think. I really like them. But the point that I'm making here is that, I don't know, like, you don't have to, like, follow this at all. Like, he's very convinced that Chekhov's gun must be big, and if it isn't, then it's a failed Chekhov's gun or whatever. But also, this has nothing to do with power scaling. So we're gonna keep moving along. This video is almost over, I promise.
In the same vein, imagine if the big bad in a multi-hour console-style RPG went down in less than a minute.
The hell's he talking about? This happens consistently in games. When a person is over leveled, they can just instantly obliterate the final boss or whatever in a series. This happens consistently in a lot of games. So I don't know what you're getting at, but this is not a power scaling thing or whatever. This is a game thing. The game lets you get stronger than the final boss.
The reward for the investment wouldn't be satisfying. And even if you can't articulate why, you'll probably come out with a damaged experience. Not necessarily ruined, but damaged. We want to see threats overcome, yes, but it's important that the threats not be built up as main eventers, but in reality are curtain-jerking jobbers, or having your curtain jerker be a main eventer. Stay frosty.
What the hell was that about? I'm sorry. I thought that was insane a little bit. Like, you gotta like put this in the perspective here. This is in the middle of a Godzilla video and it doesn't seem very connected. As far as I'm concerned, you have to sit through like several minutes of this guy explaining like Chekhov's gun or something and his personal eyes or whatever and a bunch of other stuff just to reach the point that um Alastor is making. Alastor himself just couldn't make the point, so he needed someone else to ask him or help him. And it's perfectly fine to do so, but it doesn't seem to tie into the main point at all beyond something Godzilla's still a punk, like in the previous videos. Oh god.
Speaking of Godzilla in this movie, I got a motherfucking bone to pick with you guys. This is the only movie in the franchise that puts Godzilla's hero status into question. When he attacks Apex in Pensacola, Florida, there's this news broadcast that has the header that says, "Godzilla no longer Titan savior." So in universe, he was considered a savior. Dare I say, a hero up until this point. Interesting how many comments I got saying Godzilla is an anti-hero and not a hero in this franchise, when GVK states that he was a savior up until he attacks Pensacola. Even then, spoiler alert kiddos, an anti-hero is still a hero. The hint is in the name. An anti-hero is a character who is a hero but lacks the traditionally heroic traits that your typical hero has. While Godzilla isn't a giant dinosaur who's flying around in a red and blue cape, he is still a being who provides a net good to the world he inhabits. His motive in this movie is not understood until the end, but his goal was an understandable and justifiable objective.
It's crazy. This guy thinks that everyone believes that anti-hero was supposed to be a negative trait. Nobody said that he was specifically a villain for being an anti-hero, but his, actions are questionable. Like, huh? Nobody's disagreeing with you. Why did you do that? Why'd you go on a tangent about that? Nobody disagreed with you, man.
I know I said I wouldn't bring up any of the Japanese films, but you know what other Godzilla film was very lore heavy in the first half? Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or GMK for short. Holy Jesus, that film has very little breaking up the exposition that explains the lore behind the guardian monsters and what possesses Godzilla. It's not bad per se, but it's definitely an acquired taste. It is not for everyone.
Alastor here seems a little not very satisfied, I guess, if that's the word. I don't think he's particularly like the most like, happy that they gave out every little bit in detail of information away, and it kind of like made him go like, oh, it's acquired taste. So he's not like saying it's good or bad, but he's saying it's okay. But here's the thing, right? He was begging for exposition on every little thing. He wanted to know how to capture Kong or whatever, if Godzilla's the last of his kind, and all that stuff. Even though implicit storytelling did all the details for him, he needed the movie to tell him.
So now that I've seen all 4 of the Monsterverse films that have been released at the time of recording, I'd like to compile my thoughts on the Monsterverse as a whole. Given where the Monsterverse started, I'm thoroughly disappointed with where it currently is and where it is heading. You can deny it all you want, but the reality is that the Monsterverse definitely started with a grounded and more realistic take on the kaiju genre of films. Now we're getting Diet Pacific Rim with the neon lights and hyper technology.
At least talk about the filmic qualities of Pacific Rim and compare it to Godzilla vs. Kong instead of just calling it Diet Pacific Rim. Like, Pacific Rim is not just neon lights, dude. I don't know if you haven't figured it out yet, but like Godzilla vs. Kong doesn't have anything to do with Pacific Rim or doesn't have anything in common with Pacific Rim, but for some reason the comparison is still sticking out in this guy's mind. Like, you could choose any other comparison and you chose Pacific Rim. Okay.
The tone is inconsistent because there's no one at the top with a vision. Each movie is just some standalone adventure that picks and chooses what matters from the previous films. And I don't think what I'm about to say should be all that controversial. The rest of the Monsterverse should have been like Kong Skull Island. We had monsters fighting monsters, a good human villain, decently written human characters, solid world building, and a main kaiju character that is more than just a roaring monster. It had everything fans of the Monsterverse are looking for, and it had everything someone like myself is looking for. You can have your cake and eat it too here, guys. It can be done.
Okay. Kong Skull Island is a very bold and expressive movie. That's literally it. Every other movie is much different from each other, and that's how it is going to be. Monsterverse movies are designed to have a director's vision or creator's vision, specifically on what they feel like is best for the film, which, doesn't have to be bold and expressive for every single one of them. If you had a gazillion Kong Skull Islands in the style of like two Godzilla movies, Kong Skull Island, then Godzilla vs. Kong, and then the New Empire, I don't think people would want I don't think people would want the Skull Island style to remain. And the thing is that the Skull Island style is a very good style, but you need to understand that not every movie needs to be just like Skull Island. So he's still advocating for tonal perpetuity and visual perpetuity and so on, just like in the previous video where he was obsessing over -1.
Many believe that a film can only be in one of two camps: turn your brain off silly escapism or dark and serious commentary. But the ridiculous thing is, most of these are not mutually exclusive. You can have escapism and keep it serious. Example, Captain America Civil War. You can have your commentary and keep the silliness. Example, GMK. You can have a film be dark and still keep the escapism. Example, John Wick, the first one at least.
None of these fall into this weird dichotomy he's putting out: escapism and commentary. Civil War is not very fun. It's not silly. It's not anything. Civil War is just another Marvel movie that's like an endless pit. Marvel movies do. Moving on. Don't care. GMK is not silly. GMK is genuinely like a very messed up Godzilla film for Godzilla standards. It's an increasingly depressing film where Godzilla keeps winning and nothing goes right and everyone's dying, and it's not going well at all for anybody. And the last example, I forgot it, so oops, I guess. Sorry. Oh wait, never mind. It's John Wick. Um, John Wick isn't particularly like ever been the most serious. The thing about John Wick is that John Wick has always been inherently based in this idea of a guy relapsing into addiction. You're supposed to feel like the whole LSD vibe or whatever. Not even LSD, but like, druggy vibe as he kills people. And it looks good and it feels good when you see it on screen. And the movies keep emphasizing this until John Wick just dies unceremoniously in the fourth film. And that's like the big whole meta commentary of John Wick. So it's not like, fun, but it's not serious either. John Wick doesn't sit in these two camps. John Wick sits firmly in between two of them, in my personal opinion. You don't have to agree, but John Wick is like pretty awesome, I think. But that's just me, and you get the point. But you should not see these three films in these two dichotomies whatsoever, because like they're really not at all.
Digress. The Monsterverse is interesting because the four movies I watched lined up under the four permutations of possible opinions I could have on a film, including the lesser common ones. Godzilla 2014 was a film I didn't necessarily like subjectively, but the plot and character writing objectively wasn't the worst in the world. Kong Skull Island was a film that I enjoyed subjectively and was also objectively written decently. King of the Monsters was objectively an abomination and I subjectively hated every second of it. And Godzilla vs. Kong was objectively a train wreck script while I conversely enjoyed it on a subjective level. That, my friends, is how I separate objectivity from subjectivity.
All right, this is a little silly. Why are you doing that? You don't have to do that at all. You can literally just say that you liked the movie, but like stuff you did in it was bad. You do not need to create this weird separation thing or dichotomy between the two terms of subjective and objective. You don't need to do that at all, actually. All you really need to do is just be very straightforward. And, people will say, oh, well, he enjoyed it, but he didn't like the writing. Okay, whatever. You don't have to do that. It doesn't make you smarter for doing that, which is what this guy seems to be doing, where he's touting this whole thing where he's like, oh, well, this is how I separate subjectivity from objectivity. And it's like, who cares? Who cares?
Now, what you can't do is be upset because the objective flaws in a movie ruin someone's enjoyment of it. I saw a few comments that were confused by why I cared so much about the logistics of the emergency services during Godzilla's San Francisco fight when I criticized King of the Monsters, because that is something that breaks the immersion for me.
So let's talk immersion real quick. The thing about immersion is that immersion is a very specific reference to the concept of the suspension of disbelief. And because there are no services, EMS services in San Francisco, then, suddenly it breaks his immersion somehow. The reality is that immersion, people at least, um, is that these guys read it as a non-interactive simulation. Like this guy, for example, this whole non-interactive simulation was experiencing the real-time events where San Francisco was destroyed by Godzilla. Oh wait, where's the EMS guys? I can't enjoy this movie anymore. It broke my immersion. And people think and these guys, the immersion guys, think the universe is actually real. They quote unquote immerse themselves into the fictional place. You should treat this like Evangelion's LCL, where they immerse themselves into the mech, and they be sync with it and everything. Think of mecha animes, think of all that stuff. They become one with it. That's what immersion pretty much is for the most part. And it's always been like that, right? It's been employed in games where people become so immersed into the game they believe that they're the character or in the game, um, to a sense of that, and they believe that they can immerse themselves as like a disembodied spectator, which is the point of the camera. The obvious abstraction of this, however, is that the camera is erased from the movie to create this illusion of disembodied omniscience or omniscience, or one of the two ways you say it. So the problem with this whole immersion thing stems from the fact that this camera just doesn't go to the quote unquote EMS, or where's the EMS at, or something on those lines. Where are the emergency services? Where are the police? In reality, the city is utterly destroyed. Nobody can get in. But to him, because the camera doesn't go on to some random emergency services, then that means the movie broke his immersion. He can no longer feel. But in reality, anyone who does watch a movie who's sitting there actually knows it's not real. It can't be real, and you're never going to be able to immerse themselves in it. That's how people think. So a lot of these immersion people who are obsessed with immersion are obsessed with being in this world. And this is what he wants to be in, I'm guessing. This fictional Godzilla world. But it's not working. He's not going to be in there, and he's not going to feel, the fires and brimstones of San Francisco. He's not going to taste the smoke. He's not going to hear the footsteps of Godzilla and stuff like that in the real world. But that's how immersion works, unfortunately, which is really just a bigger version of suspension of disbelief, specifically based on becoming one with the place. Get what I mean? That's why there's a term for avatar people, which is offensive, which I will not say here. But let's just continue. The video's almost over.
Inconsistency and accidental retcons annoy the piss out of me because this is supposed to be a connected universe. Why in the world would this inconsistency exist in that case? It's fine if this kind of thing doesn't bother you, but you need to understand that these kinds of mistakes do bother a lot of people.
Remember what I said earlier, the aforementioned immersion people. These people can't take that these movies are just movies and can have mistakes or errors or misinterpretations. So, it's not consistent or whatever, as they so think.
All in all, what do I have to say to sum up my feelings on the Monsterverse? It could be better. And I don't mean that as a generic thoughtless criticism. I legitimately believe the Monsterverse could be better because it has done better. It has glimmering spots where you can see the potential to be on the same level of quality writing as the MCU during its heyday in Phase 3.
The MCU has not been good. Like, I'm serious. There are like only 5 good MCU movies, man. I'm sorry to tell you. The MCU movies are usually fine, range from fine to bad, but that's pretty much it. There's like 22 movies in the span of 10 years because of Phase 3, and most of them are doo doo. Like, my goodness. Now, I'm not saying that because in the most recent MCU hate or whatever that has cropped up because people finally realized that the films weren't good, but it's a very straightforward narrative. Like, I don't know what to tell you. The MCU's existing problems from phase 1 to phase 3 have literally come back to bite them in phase 4 when people started actually like getting up and realizing, wait, these movies aren't good. But they only apply it to the phase 4 films. So no, why would you want to do that comparison? You could make any other comparison. You chose that comparison. Terrible idea, man.
Will you ever get any better in your craft if you don't accept criticism? That's why I don't shy away from criticizing something and being criticized. I criticize with merit because I want to see improvement. I want to see you do great things. If I'm not voicing my criticisms, it's because I don't care if you succeed or fail.
Alastor can just dish out all this criticism, apparently, but the Twitter screenshot that's on the screen at this point kind of just probably says a little bit of otherwise, where Alistair is mad about my video. Acquaintance sent this to me. I had no knowledge of this until now, but it is what it is. Alistair just doesn't particularly want to take criticism, but he will rather dish it out towards people, and no matter how harmful it could be. And, it ties back into the beginning of the video, his weird housekeeping moment where he dismisses people and calls them dumb and says the exchange is dumb or whatever with somebody, with one person, and dismisses other people's personal things or whatever. Well, whatever. It's Alistair. I don't know what to tell him. He's just not a very good critic. I'm sorry to say this, but you're not. And I think if you want to get better, you're gonna have to acknowledge different viewpoints here that are telling you that your video, specifically in Godzilla related, might be bad. And considering these Godzilla videos aren't very good, I dread to imagine what your other videos are like. But we're done here. I don't want to talk about this guy anymore. My hands are clean now. Thank you for watching and have a good day or good night wherever you are. Like and subscribe if you want to. Thank you for watching again. Thank you.